It's time for us to check back in with Sidney Saylor Farr. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. As a child, I craved to put words together in fresh and enlightening ways. I wrote poems that were like square soldiers on a page. Then I wrote verses like high clouds before it begins to rain. While still married to Leon and living at Stony Fork, I received a scholarship to attend a Bob Lawback Each One Teach One writing workshop. At that time, different groups of people were teaching illiterate adults how to read. Soon there was a demand for books and other literature to be written about the 4th grade level for those newly literate adults. The purpose of the Each One Teach One writing workshop was to have the participants rewrite such things as government pamphlets, driver's manuals, and the like, so that a person who had very little education could read and understand the material. Each workshop participant chose what he or she would write as the class project. I chose to rewrite Kentucky Home's demonstration manual on how to prepare fruits and vegetables for the freezer. Several people from different parts of the country were lecturers and teachers for the workshop. After a week of rewriting material and hearing lectures on how other classes did it, I was bored. That weekend I wrote my first short story. I shared it with our minister's wife, who was also in the workshop. She asked permission to show it to some of the instructors. On that Monday, in the afternoon session, one of the instructors discussed a manuscript submitted by a workshop participant that was intended to retell the book of Ruth in the Bible. The instructor pointed out how miserably the author of this piece had failed and why. He said that she didn't understand what the story was about and that she did not have the soul to attempt that kind of rewrite. Then he said, at noon today, a short story was passed around and I read it. I don't know who the author is, but I can tell you she is a good writer. She has the soul to rewrite the book of Ruth. I sat there stunned, thinking, he said I'm a good writer. I felt as though I had just been born again. His statement authenticated me as a writer. One of the instructors, Robert Connor, was editor of Mountain Life and Work, a publication of the Council of the Southern Mountains in Berea. He invited me to submit some of my work to be considered for publication in Mountain Life and Work. I sent Bob a story that fall entitled The Worry Mouse. He published it, and the story, retitled Hill Country Christmas, was later reprinted in Teen Magazine. For the reprint, I was paid $75. This was the first time I was paid for my writing. That same year, a publication called Cycloflame in Texas bought one of my poems. They sent me a check for $2. I corresponded with Bob Connor and his wife Phyllis for a couple of years after the workshop. Bob published another short story of mine after Leon and I moved to Indianapolis in 1960. After living there for 2 years, we moved to Berea in 1962. My son Bruce was born in October of that year. A year later, around the time I was looking to return to work, I heard that the Council of the Southern Mountains needed a person for the staff of Mountain Life and Work. The CSM was founded in 1913 as a meeting place, clearinghouse for missionaries, teachers, and healthcare workers in Appalachia. In 1925, the council began publishing a quarterly journal that became Mountain Life and Work. In the early 1960s, President Johnson's war on poverty was going strong. The council was invited to join in the effort and provide training for workers who would be coming to the area. The first group to be organized was the Appalachian Volunteers. Ann Pollard, associate editor of Mountain Life and Work, joined that group. I applied and was hired as associate editor of Mountain Life and Work, replacing Ann. Thus began a new phase of my life. During my first year of work, I met writers James Steele, Jesse Stewart, Harriet Arnault, and Wilma Dyckman. Later, I encouraged Gurney Norman, a fairly new writer, to submit fiction to the magazine. Gurney credits me for having his first short stories published. Before I was a college student, I had already been published several times. I entered the Writer's Digest contest for short fiction one year and placed 37th among 10,000 entries. I was awarded a deed to 1 square foot of Gettysburg battlefield. Over a number of years, I attended writers' workshops at Hindman Settlement School in Knott County, Kentucky, and other places, hoping to learn how to write in a way that could please the outside world. The workshops instead gave me the courage to write about what I already knew: people, places, social events, and nature. When I enrolled in Berea College in 1972, a woman named June and I were the oldest students in the college classes. The freshmen were young enough to be our children. I was amazed at how well they accepted us. While my classmates knew about things through reading, June and I had lived them. They asked us questions and told us about themselves. After I graduated from college, I continued working as an assistant in the Archives and Special Collections Department of the Berea College Library. When the decision was made to move Appalachian Heritage from the Hindman Settlement School to Berea College in 1985, John Stevenson, the college president, appointed me as that publication's editor. Thus, another new phase opened in my life. I would not have missed being the editor of Appalachian Heritage for anything. It was a tough job because I could only work half-time on the magazine while continuing my duties to the department. But I met writers from all over the region in person, by telephone, through correspondence, and through their submissions. I also kept up on what was happening in Appalachia by reading 7 or 8 daily newspapers from different Appalachian states. I marked articles, features, comments, and scholarly works that were in the papers. Students clipped the articles I'd marked, which were then categorized and put into the large collection of books and files on Appalachia. The Berea College Library made this resource available to scholars, authors, and students researching the region. My greatest pleasure during my years as editor was to introduce new writers to the reading public. Having their pieces in Appalachian Heritage was the first many of them had been published. Among that number, Silas House, Ann Shelby, Mary Hodges, Carolyn Bettram, and many others went on to gain greater recognition and win awards for their writing. When I retired from the library in 1999, I looked forward to having more time for my own writing, but after a year, I realized that something was lacking. I missed meeting and working with fellow writers. I needed the fulfillment of contributing to the world of writing, not just creating my own. I decided that teaching writing in my home might help fill the void. I sent out a word-of-mouth announcement, and 6 women joined my class. Instead of giving lectures, I simply allowed the students to pick my brain for what I know about writing. I taught them how to edit both their own and their colleagues' work. I asked each new student to select a subject she wanted to work on: essays, poems, a memoir, a play, or a novel. I promised to help them reach the place where we considered the work ready to be sent out. I have known the joy of seeing my students become better writers, some getting their work published. In the years when I worked as associate editor of Mountain Life and Work, and especially as editor of Appalachian Heritage, what I most enjoyed was getting acquainted with new writers and helping them to get published. It is gratifying to attend conferences and workshops and have people seek me out and thank me for their first publications. Some of them have gone on to become well-known writers. Several have won prizes for their work. In return, over the years, I have gleaned words of wisdom and advice from good writers that have become my own guidelines. To prepare for my new at-home class, I brought together materials about writing. I told my new students that there are 3 key activities to remember when writing: feel, clarity, sentence flow, pace, rhythm, movement; tighten, less is best; polish, reword, rephrase, and repicture. I also advise students to avoid using more than 15 words in any sentence unless it really swings with more. To help them craft their sentences, I tell them the following: do not use the same word twice in a sentence or even a paragraph unless you do so deliberately for emphasis. Avoid using the word that more than once in a sentence. Never use more than 1 adjective at a time. If you use 2 or more, you have not found the right one. I tell students to work with the sound of words: rolling thunder, soothing rain, sharp winds, silence of the snow, the crack of ice, crystal clarity, snap, crackle, pop, and the color of words: silver on the poplar leaf, gold on the willow stem, morning glory blue, black night, gray fog, dusky dark. I also tell them to pay attention to the portent of words, both their meaning and their connotation. I try to write the way little children talk. Children express themselves with absolute clarity before adults make them lose self-confidence and cause them to become afraid of expressing themselves simply and directly. There is no artifice in children. They are honest and bold when they express their true feelings. Given my love of words and the joy that I feel when I write it, it was inevitable that I would write a poem about words. The living word is sought by poets and writers. It often comes at just the right time to turn a phrase, make a perfect rhyme, then come the ecstasy and the pain, as hard and gentle as fallen rain. On April fields plowed for planting, the living word comes in unexpected places, an autumn leaf floating to the ground, a winter bell calling the sound. Ringing clear across the miles, the pain of a goodbye in summer, thunder followed by rain, falling on the sleeping fields. The living word comes in various shapes and sizes, icicles hanging from the eaves, wind blowing among ice-laden trees, and all white flowers in May, a silver brook, a loaf of bread, a well-read book. June roses for a bridal bouquet. The living word is found in many places, in a red apple on a backyard tree, in a blueberry pie baked for me by Granny Reed, in red clover and sunset when the day turns over to sink and rest in the cool black night. The living word will come to poets and writers who eat and drink living words. I used to think of poetry as water, and not just because water is essential to life. When it rained long enough for little springs to gush out from the hillsides, out of crawdad holes, out from underneath rocks, and run down little gullies, I spent some of my happiest hours outside. I played in the tiny streams, channeling one into another until I had larger ones running together until they reached level ground. Playing in water and looking for new streams became symbolic of poetry to me. My great-grandmother, Granny Brock, and other mountain women worked hard, cooking, cleaning, spinning, and caring for home and family from daylight to dark. They made all of their family's clothes and warm quilts for their beds. They found creative satisfaction in their quilts and embroidered pieces. Today there's not so much need for quilts and warm clothing. Mountain women no longer have the opportunity to satisfy their creative talent as they work. Instead, they write down stories and poems, weave tapestries, and paint pictures to satisfy that creative urge. I needed an outlet for my creative urge, and I found it especially satisfying to write poetry. Over the years, people have tried to define poetry. Some say it is like trying to paint the wind. Others call it the language of amazement. It has been said that science is for people who learn, poetry is for people who know. John Donne says poetry is counterfeit creation. Robert Frost says that poetry is a way of taking life by the throat. Samuel Taylor Coleridge says that if prose is the right word in the right order, poetry must be the best word in the best order. I took a poetry class one semester while I was a student at Berea College. One Friday assignment was to write 10 haiku and bring them to class on the following Monday. Up to that time, I had never read a haiku, let alone knew what kind of poem it was. The professor explained the form and suggested we read a collection or two before we began our assignment. I doubted I would be able to write even one decent haiku, let alone 10 of them. That weekend I began both reading and trying to write that form of poetry. Here are the 10 I turned in on the following Monday. Death. Facing east he lies. Morning sun touches his grave. My heart is still dark. Fear. Verbena blossoms. Darkness gallops up the hill. Quick, hide your children. Reality. Battered old woman selling flowers in the street. Oh, look, my mother. Blackbirds. 33 blackbirds stripping the tender green corn. Scarecrow meditates. Faith. Homemade grave basket adorning our piano. Music does not die. Revelation. Raindrops falling. Break and wet the silver lichen. Look, a burning bush. Lost love. Ah, shattered dewdrops, crystal pieces of a broken dream. It ended today. Curiosity, a snowball bloomed out in July instead of May. Wonder what it means. Grace, angry waves dash high. Noises, wasted energy. Manna falls at dawn. Experience, sad with her knowing. Earth sighs and covers her face with old and tender leaves. Dr. Sears, the teacher of that course, gave us many assignments throughout the semester, but none was more challenging than writing haikus. I fell in love with the discipline required for this form. Most of my poems in my first book of poetry, Headwaters, are in free verse, but a few are written to form. I like to think of poetry as freedom within discipline. First you learn the technique and forms, and only after learning those do you take wing and fly. My first book, Appalachian Women, an Annotated Bibliography, was published in 1981. It grew out of the first independent study I did at Berea. Loyal Jones, one of my sponsors, suggested that I see if the University Press of Kentucky might like to publish it. An editor came to Berea each spring to talk with prospective authors on campus. Berea College was part of a consortium with the state university system. This meant that a committee on campus first had to agree the manuscript was worth publishing. If the committee agreed to publish, Berea College would pay 50% of the publication cost. Revenue from sales of the book would then go to Berea College until the college was reimbursed. Putting all the annotations into manuscript form was a big job for me. At the end, I had 1,800 index cards. A very good friend of the college library, Alfred Perrion, offered to pay a typist to get it ready to show a publisher. The University Press of Kentucky accepted it for publication, and the book came out in the spring of 1981. It garnered good reviews in both print and on radio broadcast and was used by the students, classes, authors, researchers, and others. My next book also began as an independent study after a suggestion made by James Steele. I first met this well-known Appalachian writer when I was associate editor of Mountain Life and Work, and he became my mentor and my friend for more than 30 years. One day, on a visit to Berea, he invited me to lunch. In a restaurant, he talked about mountain food and how it was cooked before the advent of electricity and microwave cooking. You know, the old ways are fading out, he said. Someone should write a book about mountain food. I can't do a book like that, but you can. I was amazed when he offered to tell his agent about it. This inspired me to collect recipes of Appalachian cooks. I found a sponsor for the project in Berea's Home Economics Department. On the advice of my sponsors and friends, I submitted the manuscript to the University of Pittsburgh Press, which at that time was interested in publishing regional works. After some rewriting and editing, the manuscript was accepted. More Than Moonshine, Appalachian Recipes and Recollections was published in 1983. It was widely reviewed in this country and in England, reprinted 6 times. It has earned more royalties than all my other books combined. My next book was another cookbook, Table Talk, came out in 1995. For it, I received a grant to help with expenses as I traveled to different states, interviewing a variety of Appalachian residents about their history with food. I started each chapter with a brief introduction, then deleted my questions from the interviews so as to allow the rest of each chapter to be in the interviewees' own voices, with their favorite receipts printed at the end of each chapter. I am proud that my 2 cookbooks, More Than Moonshine and Table Talk, have preserved the history of mountain people and mountain cooks. My first book about Tom Sawyer, What Tom Sawyer Learned from Dying, was published in 1993. It described Tom's early years, his near-death experience at the age of 33, and how that experience changed his life. When friends and co-workers heard about my plans to write a book about Tom, several implored me not to do it. In essence, they said I had established a good reputation for myself as an Appalachian writer. To do a book that was so different, so new age, would hurt that reputation. When people told me this, I felt some of the same feelings I'd had when Dad came to my house and cried because I wouldn't agree to join the Holiness Church. Was I right in believing God had chosen me to write Tom's story? Intuitively, I felt I must do the book. The ideal haunted me. It would not go away. Tom Sawyer and the Spiritual Whirlwind, published in 2000, was about Tom's trips to Tibet and his meeting and assisting the Dalai Lama in Canada. The book includes a chapter about a tornado in Berea in 1996 when Tom was at my home. Getting to know Tom, witness his work, and hear his teachings has answered many of my questions about God and church. The 2 books I have published about Tom Sawyer and his near-death experience have sold widely. I have received many letters and telephone calls from appreciative readers. Headwaters, my first book of poetry, was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in 1995. This book is a collection of poems written from my early years until when I met Tom Sawyer. I am so grateful that Mary Holman at Virginia Technical College in Blacksburg, Virginia, who owned Pocahontas Press, took a chance on publishing my first poetry book. I am currently working on a second collection. The Spoonbread Cookbook I published myself in 1996. It was compiled at the request of the Berea Chamber of Commerce when they were planning the first Spoonbread Festival in Berea. It has sold well. Like many writers, I've had my share of rejection letters. I know all too well what getting such a letter feels like. While I was editor of Appalachian Heritage, the hardest task I had was rejecting submissions. If I could not use a writer's work, I wrote a personal letter explaining why. Sometimes I gave advice about how I thought the piece could be improved. I always loved to attend the writers' workshops at Hindman, Kentucky. In August, participants come from North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, New Jersey, New York, and a number of other states across the country to the lovely settlement town of Hindman, which sits in a small valley completely surrounded by hills. At the time of the writer's workshop, everything is lush and green from spring rains, and flowers are blooming everywhere you look. In this neat, well-groomed pocket of civilization, you can sit in a rocking chair on the porch and look into the spaces between trees in the uncut forest, which come down the hill just a few yards from the porch. No matter how hot it gets during the day, at night it cools off, and the next morning dawns cool and damp from heavy dew. Many of the workshop participants, including me, rise early. After getting a cup of coffee in the dining room, we sit in the rocking chairs on the porch and read, meditate, write, or chat with others while waiting for the bell to ring for breakfast. The workshops feature classes on the writing of novels, poetry, children's books, and nonfiction. A number of participants find success with regional and national publishers. Some return to teach classes at the workshop. In July 2004, the Appalachian Writers Association named me the Appalachian writer who contributed most to the region and its people. And in December 2005, I was named Writing Sister of the Year by the New Opportunity School for Women Writers. I was given a scrapbook containing letters of appreciation for my books, my teaching, and my mentoring. The letter from Linda Caldwell, an internationally published writer, sums up what most of the letters and comments say. Sidney, you have been a mentor to Appalachian writers and especially to Appalachian women writers. For this, we admire you. You have been a rock for the NOSW writers over the past 5 years. You have greatly encouraged writing, revising, and submitting. You have been a quiet cheerleader and wise woman. For this, we love you. Your excellent example in writing and life has given a pattern to follow. For this, we admire you. You are a model woman that all would like to be. You walk in beauty. I am ever so privileged to know you. With love and respect, Linda Caldwell. Writing has been an essential part of my life for as long as I can remember. It has brought me recognition, some money, and a sense of fulfillment that nothing else brings. My books go out into the world and make new friends for me. They serve as teaching tools for those I cannot reach. I am glad I am a writer. I am privileged to have worked with well-established authors and especially with brand new ones, sharing their elation in being published for the first time. As the sun goes down, the last lingering rays of sun paint the Pilot Knob hill in pale gold and highlight a distant tree. Smudges of charcoal-colored clouds drift in the pale pink sky that the sunset left behind. It is time to go inside to the big warm kitchen for the evening meal. Berea, Kentucky is situated directly on the Wilderness Road, which brought the first settlers into Kentucky. Daniel Boone came through the Cumberland Gap for the first time on a hunting trip, and later a band of 30 men with axes cut the Wilderness Road into Kentucky. This opened the Great West for one of the mightiest migrations in human history. From 1775 to 1796, more than 200,000 men, women, and children traveled over the Wilderness Road on horseback and on foot, seeking homes in mid-America and the Northwest. The town of Berea grew up around Berea College, which was founded in 1855. The college was founded to promote the ideal of Christian brotherhood and equality on a non-sectarian and interracial basis. Berea College experienced some turbulent days and nights both before and after the Civil War. Berea is in an area as varied as Kentucky itself, and it has been my home since 1962. At first I found living in Berea so different than where I'd grown up. I missed the presence of tall mountains. I liked the convenience of city life, but I longed to wade in creeks again, to hear whippoorwills calling in the evenings, to hear cowbells ringing as cows were driven home from milking. My older son, Dennis Wayne, was 11 years old when we moved to Berea from Indianapolis. My son, Bruce Allen, was born in Berea. I feel that in a way I grew up in Berea along with my boys. Being on the Mountain Life and Work staff in the mid-1960s, I was privileged to meet some of the workers engaged in the War on Poverty. I met both established and emerging writers. I learned more about Appalachia and my people by viewing them through the eyes of newcomers. In 1984, before Dr. John Stevenson was inaugurated president of Berea College, I was initiated into the Honor Society Phi Kappa Phi and was named by the national office to represent Phi Kappa Phi at the inauguration. This was astounding to me that I, from the hills of southeastern Kentucky, a new college graduate, would be able to don a cap and gown and participate in the activities. Grant and I invited the Stevensons to our house for dinner in November 1984. At the table, John told us that Appalachian Heritage was being moved from the Alice Lloyd College to Berea, sponsored under the college umbrella. He said he was looking for just the right person to be the editor. My heart jumped into my throat and I could hardly get out the words. I'd give my eye teeth to have that job. "You're the perfect person," John exclaimed. "I've read your books. You know Appalachia better than most people I could think of for the job." Just like that, the decision was made, and it gave me something to live for after Grant left for Oregon. I met Tom Sawyer in the summer of 1987. That meeting and my working with him on 2 books changed my life for the better. Moving to Berea was also a positive development in my life and the lives of my sons. My son Bruce was born in the Berea College Hospital. I got a job with the Council of the Southern Mountains and associate editor of Mountain Life and Work. I was accepted as a degree candidate in Berea College. On my first visit to the college library, I was too scared even to think about checking out a book. Later, I was employed as a full-time staff member at that same library and worked in the Special Collections and Archives Department for 24 years. My first book, Appalachian Women, was published as a result of my work at Berea. I successfully bridged the psychological gap between the mountain community of Stony Fork and the academic town of Berea. As I end this memoir, it is with good feelings about ongoing projects. I continue with the writing class in my home. A book study group also meets at my house each Tuesday evening. The New Opportunity School for Women has a writers group that meets monthly. I have served as a mentor to the group and have witnessed exciting growth and opportunities for these women. Looking back on my life has shined a spotlight on my naivety, hidden motives, deep anger, remorse, repentance, and revelation. Telling my story has brought me pain, tears, dreams, and remembered grief. It has also enhanced the gratitude I feel for my heritage. I believe that my life has been unique and that I've had rare opportunities and gifts. There are many good books still to be read and more for me to write. And that's the end of the book. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. This last part, she kind of goes back over some of the stuff that she's already shared, but also kind of gives you a more of a look of how she looks at her life as she kind of looks over the back, kind of as she said. She can look back and see from the time she was on Stony Fork to all the years she spent in Berea, and then also kind of with that hopeful look of what she's going to look forward to as she goes forward, including continuing to teach the classes and continuing to try to write. All the parts that she talked about, the writing classes and the encouraging other writers. I have a dear friend, Glenda Bell, and that part really reminded me of her. She is a wonderful poet, and she's taught for many years. I've been in charge of the organization over the writers of Western North Carolina, taught at the local college, taught at the folk school, taught at Young Harris College, lots of different things. And I used to work for her. I used to help her around her house, do different things. And eventually she started a writing group in her house too, like that. So lots of similarities there of how encouraging she was to other writers, no matter the age. She encouraged me when I started writing the blog. She encouraged Katie because of her love of poetry. So that part of Sidney's life really reminded me of my friend Glenda. And you can imagine how it really endured Sidney to other people there in Berea, other writers and beyond, people that were really interested in writing. I like this part of the book too, because she kind of give bits and pieces. I mean, it was interesting to hear about her thoughts about being a writer and all that, but kind of went back to her days at Stony Creek. I love the part where she talked about when it would rain, how she would get out and make the little streams of water go into one creek and, you know, kind of play in that and dam it up. I loved that. I love to play in water. I always loved to play in the creek. And when I was a kid, it seems like it rains way more now than it did then. But when we did get a really big rain, this occurrence would happen in Pap and Granny's backyard, and I always thought it was magical. Not just any rain, it had to be a real gully washer, as we would say. And there was a little creek that it was a spring, I'm sure a wet weather spring. It would come out of the woods and come down through Granny and Pap's yard into kind of the natural, kind of where the bank met the yard, and form a natural little creek right there. It wouldn't last long. When the sun come up, it would dry up, but I would play in that, and I would just think that was so magical. I still love water like that, although I've had enough rain. I wish my rain would go away and my backyard would dry out, but I've always been fascinated with water like that, so I like that little part of Sidney talking about that part. And I really liked her little entrance to the last chapter as the sun goes down and talking about the beautiful sky and everything, but then the warmth of home. You can kind of picture that in your mind if you've been out and about in the cold, and whether it's at night or during the day, and you come back and you can see the smoke coming from the chimney and kind of see the lights inside the house. You know I've felt that when I'm even something as simple as walking back up from Granny's house in the dark, and I see the lights on in my house, and I know Matt and the girls when they were younger would be in here, and the smoke coming out of the chimney, I can smell the wood smoke, and I know when I come in it's going to be warm and toasty. Kind of that, it seems very fitting to put at the end of her book how she was kind of looking back over, I think, her years of Stony Fork, but also her years of Berea, the happiness and the joy that she experienced, along with the sad things she had to endure, like Leon and her other issues, which is really, how all of our lives are. I hope you enjoyed this book now that it's finished, and I have to apologize for all the noise. If you've been hearing a lot of noise while I've been reading today, we're having our roof redone, and I thought that they were done with this end of the house, so I come back here thinking they would be in the front part, and apparently I misjudged, because as soon as I started reading, they were right above my head. So I apologize for that. I would have waited for another day, but this is my only time frame that I had, and I did try to work around them, but it didn't work out. And what they're doing is really important, so of course I wasn't going to try to discourage them from redoing our roof. We're really excited about getting it redone. Now, this book is finished, but next week I'll be starting another one, so be sure to come back next Friday. I'm not sure what it will be yet. I've narrowed it down to a couple, and I'll have to wait till then to really decide. That's how I usually do the books that I've read here, and I really appreciate all of you who listen and look forward to the readings. And I will have a book next Friday, so be sure to drop back by then, and I'll share the new book with you, and we'll get started on a new story about Appalachia.